Hello and welcome back to another how to paint tutorial. Now if you joined us last time, you'd have seen that we painted a mighty space marine, specifically Dark Angels. Not to brag, but I think it came out pretty decent. This time, however, we're going to be looking at the B1 Battledroid. Now given that these are much simpler to paint models and we'll probably do a much quicker little job of this, we actually have two here. That way, while one is drying, we can work on the other one. Now we do have a couple of different paints here. We have Xandri Dust for the base. We have Abaddon Black, which will be kind of our shading first layer. For another base color, we have Bugman's Glow, which we'll use in kind of a surprising way if you haven't thought of it before. We have Lead Belcher, just for a few little details. And then to cover it all off, we have a nice shade of Agrax Earthshade. Kind of like non-oil, liquid talent, if you will, but a little bit more brown and better to be used on kind of your more warm colors. So we're going to go ahead and grab our old reliable brush here. Excuse the box that just fell over. Again, we're not using anything kind of fancy in terms of brushes. This has been through the ringer a few times. I definitely need to find a replacement at some point, but it's done me well for a few months, so it's just going to keep on trucking. We'll start with our Abaddon Black here. Again, you have a few different choices when it comes to your first layer. Abaddon Black works for me. Personally, I just like the kind of darker shades that it ends up leaving us off with. And we'll go ahead and apply it kind of liberally to our model to start with. Again, you don't need perfect coverage, and a good bit of water to kind of, especially your darker colors, is recommended, just because you don't want it on too thick, especially for something that's just a simple first shading layer. It'll make your paint look pretty blotchy and kind of overcoated, which if you haven't painted before, if it's one of your first times painting, that won't make a lot of sense to you, but I promise after a first few paint jobs it will, especially if you're not thinning your paints. And excuse me knocking the camera there. I'm trying to figure out a better kind of setup. I have right now is a little rough. The camera is literally right in the middle of my setup, but unfortunately with this tripod I don't have any more room on my desk, so I can't move it around too much. So hopefully that'll be something that I can figure out in the future and change for the better, and if not, I will just do my best not to bump it anymore. Go ahead and finish up this starting layer. Again, don't worry about total coverage. It will help with your shading, especially if you don't have a solid layer. It's just meant to kind of bring out the kind of shadows more. And we'll call that finished. And the nice thing about painting two models here, wash off our brush, is that by the time we finish one model, our other one is pretty much dry. Now we're going to go ahead and jump to our second layer, which is where the Bugman's Glow comes in. It's more of a flesh tone, kind of a skin color, but we're not going to be doing that with it today. We are instead going to be using this as kind of a, we'll say, toning layer, I guess. We want it just to get the right shade of tan that we'll end up with. Now, if you're a fan of Star Wars like I am, you've probably seen a multitude of paint jobs for the B1 specifically. I personally am a huge fan of the Geonosis scene and all of the scenes that follow that, returning to Geonosis throughout the following movies and shows and whatnot. But their original appearance in the arena, I guess is the word for it, in the second episode is my personal favorite. I think it's where they really shine in the showing off their kind of combat role, even though the Jedi of course won in the end. And that's the problem with Star Wars, is the good guys kind of always win. Unless you look at the newer movies, in which case the good guys won But it didn't matter because they wanted to redo the exact same scenes and movies anyway. But we won't get into that too much, other than I don't like the new films. We'll just say that. I like Rey. She's okay. I think they kind of butchered her character a little bit. I liked Finn in the first movie. They really pushed him to the sideline. And that's about the only praise I have for the newer films. And again, we just kind of want not really a total coverage here. This is going to be more useful for shading by the time we're finished. But kind of a rusty, kind of desert. He's been fighting in dust and dirt and whatnot. And that's the look we really want to pull off here. So now, give our brush a little clean here. And again, while we're applying new paints, or new coats of paint rather, we want to be mindful of how much paint we have on our brush as well as how much water we have in our actual paint. If you haven't painted before, or if you're new to it, and people keep telling you to thin your paints, it just means to add water. A good way of telling whether you have too much or too little is by telling kind of once you start getting bubbles in your paint as you're putting it on your palette. It's harder to tell because my palette is filled with dried paint, so it all just kind of blends together. But if you have too much water in your paint, you'll be able to tell very easily what I mean. I'll give this just a few more seconds to dry here. Actually, this guy's finished, so we'll go ahead and start applying it to him. Again, this is our Xandri dust. This is kind of going to be our main layer now. And this is the one where you want to get kind of a total coverage. Because if it looks splotchy, it's going to be the easiest to tell. This is our lightest color. And we'll go back and redo his gun with black afterwards. And we'll be careful with that as well, because getting black on a light color is exponentially harder to fix than getting a light color over black. And we'll finish up here. Again, these are very quick models to do. If you're doing an entire army of them, you can pump them out pretty quick, especially if you're not paying too much attention to detail, which is why we're doing 2 at once today. And if you're batch painting, you can pump through squads. I think these guys come in squads of 5. You can get through it pretty quick, as opposed to, say, Space Marine, which I think on average, when I'm not recording, it takes about 2 hours for each one, and that's if I'm just doing battle ready. I really like to take my time, and even if I have a squad of 10 guys to do or so, I kind of get wrapped up in just focusing on each one. It's not a bad habit, but if you're kind of aiming for speed, it's not the mindset you want to have. And this guy is actually going to end up looking a little bit kind of rustier than our other B1 there. And that's okay. You don't want, your entire army looking exactly the same. Having a little bit of kind of distinction helps with, the feeling of these guys aren't just fresh off the factory line. These guys have been fighting in a battle for a while. And I really like that kind of effect. And that is another reason for putting the Bugman's Glow underneath, because it kind of gives you that rusty, he's starting to fall apart kind of thing, right? Like, he hasn't been painted for a while. He probably is going to be left to die alone on a battlefield somewhere, as is the case of many of the B1s, especially in the Clone Wars series, which, if you haven't watched the Clone Wars animated series, it's 7 seasons. I highly recommend it. I think it's peak Star Wars. I know a lot of people talk up Andor. I've seen the first episode of it. I mean to watch more. And I feel like that goes for a lot of movies. I mean to watch all of it, and I just never get around to it. But that's okay. So, without further ado, if I can find it, there we are. We're going to come back to our Abaddon Black here. And I talked a little bit earlier about finishing up with the guns. Now again, this is where we want to be careful, because if I screw up at this stage, it's a lot harder to fix. and we really want to avoid that. So we're using a nice watered down layer of black here, and just covering the guns here as well as we can. The problem with having paint all over your palette is that it's hard to find where your wet paint and your dry paint is, right? Especially if you put so little amounts on here like I do, which it's just kind of a not wasting paint thing for me, but you shouldn't be afraid to kind of overfill your palette. And we'll come back here with a kind of second pass. It's the nice thing about using little amounts of paint at a time is that it tends to dry as you kind of finish up. Basically, as soon as you put it down, it's dry and ready to go again, and that's what I love about miniatures, is that it is, if you make it quick, or if you put in an effort to make it a quick process, it can be very, very quick. I've been meaning to get some speed paints. I think Army Painter is the one that everyone uses, specifically the 2.0 speed paints. I'd love to kind of check those out at some point. But for now, we're going to be using our classic Citadel brand paints. They're a little bit pricey, but personally for me, I just can't really say anything negative about them. They have done me wonders so far. I know that Null and Oil and I think Agrax Earthshade actually kind of got a change in their formula. I believe it was a few years ago now. And unfortunately, I wasn't painting in the time that their peak formula was kind of a thing, according to what I've read and people's complaints. But I think as it is now, the formula works fine for me. I get plenty of use out of it. I'm at kind of a weird angle here. It's hard for me to see. I'm sure it's hard for you to see as well. And again, my trembling hands aren't great. But we're kind of getting into that point now of, if it's hard to see, it's hard to, or if it's hard to paint, rather, it's hard to see. So don't worry too much about it, right? Especially if you're playing tabletop. This is a part of the Star Wars Legion line, I think. Specifically the Clone Wars era. I think they also cover the Empire Strikes Back kind of era with stormtroopers and whatnot. I don't know if they have a First Order set. I'd kind of like it if they did. I don't like the newer movies too much, but I can always go for more miniatures. Alright? If that kind of logic makes sense, I guess. And as I struggle to stay in camera view here, we'll just finish up with the guns. Oops. I'm not using my painting handle today. My minis are going all over the place. But when we're painting two minis at once, the painting handle just kind of becomes annoying, trying to switch back and forth constantly. Especially if we're doing it this way. If I was painting them one at a time, then it'd be much more effective just to do it that way, but we're not. So we won't worry too much about that. And the reason I have Lead Belcher with me for this specific paint job is for this model only, actually, because they're slightly different. It's just for this second half of the barrel there. I don't know if that's like canologically black in the movies. I don't really remember. But I felt like that should be silver for some reason. I just think it'd make it a little bit more interesting. Kind of more little detail just for cool effect, alright? And now that we have these guys primarily done, and I bumped the camera again because I am too clumsy for my own good, we're going to go back to All Reliable here, my horrible, diseased paintbrush that needs to be replaced. And we're going to be starting on the base. Now, I don't know if this is going to work, or if this is going to fail horribly, but if you've seen the movies, and you've seen what Geonosis looks like, and I probably should have done this while I had my Xandri Dust originally, you know that Geonosis is kind of a red, sandy desert kind of planet. So we're going to come in here with our Xandri Dust originally. And we're just going to do a solid paint job on that. Again, doesn't matter if you really miss too much. We're just going to go over it with another paint in a second. And then we'll cover that in a wash as well. And I'm hoping that if I can keep this in view, again, sorry, my setup is kind of wacky. Hopefully I can fix it in the future, but we'll see. I want something to the effect of kind of a geonosis feel, right? And I've managed it kind of with this mini, if I could avoid getting paint all over it. This is the Brahmin from Fallout, a very nice little model. But basically I'm doing the opposite effect that I did here. I started with Bugman's Glow here, and I did over it with Xandri Dust. I kind of want the opposite of that. And I'm hoping, I've never done this before, so it's kind of, we're going blind here, that it'll give us more of a red desert kind of vibe. And if it looks horrible, that's okay. We will drown it in Agrax Earthshade and hope for the best. And if all else fails, I do have my trusty Sterling Mud sitting right across from me, so we can always resort to that. Hopefully we won't have to, however. And this is kind of a twofold thing here. Not only am I trying to get a kind of dusty desert vibe, but I'm also just trying to showcase how doing the same paints, but doing them in different stages, can kind of give you way different effects and finished kind of product. And already I kind of like what's happening with this. We don't really want to cover all of it. We want kind of some variance in our floor there, I guess, our base. Because again, you know, especially a war-torn desert isn't going to look uniform. It's not going to look entirely the same across all bases. And actually there's still a little bit of blue there, so we will go back over that. And it's not perfect. It's not exactly what I want, but I'm hoping with a nice shade it will be. So make sure our brush is very, very thoroughly cleaned off there. And for this, you don't really need to thin it down too much, otherwise you're just going to be doing layer after layer and having no effect. But we are going to be popping open our Agrax Earthshade, and you kind of want to be careful with how much is on your brush when you do this. But we're going to start on our B1s here and really grime it up. And actually, I still might have a little bit too much paint on my brush just for what we're going for. But actually, as I kind of get further through, I'm really liking the look of it. If I can kind of clean it up. It tends to pull in certain areas, which I think is the newest complaint for, or the major complaint for the newest recipe for the non-oil and Agrax Earthshades specifically, is that they pull a lot. If you're doing recesses and you're doing kind of darker areas where you want it to pull, that's a good thing. But it likes to do it on flat, plainy kind of spots, and that's a bad thing. We don't want that. And now we'll move on to our second B1. And you might realize that I didn't do that silver yet, and there's kind of a reason. I don't like doing Agrax over silver. I like doing non-oil for silver. I feel like it kind of has a little bit of a less brown tinge to it. It makes it a little bit more shiny. And that's kind of what we want. And actually, I feel like this time I did do a little bit too much shade there. So we're going to try to get some off the model here and more on the base. And again, it's not doing too much, but it is kind of making it a little bit darker here. And it's not going to be perfect, but that's okay. This is the first time I'm trying it, so, you know, it's not meant to look perfect. I think we'll do one more pass each for the bases. Get in here again. And you might see that I'm spilling over the rim horribly, and that's okay. I don't have the specific shade of blue, so I think at some point I'll just go over and make the base black anyway. I know that the bases are different for the different factions, and that's kind of cool, but I'm not really bothered by it. I don't play tabletop too much, I just focus on painting. So that's what we're going to focus on in these videos. And at some point in the future, I might never fix it. I might make it black, I don't know. But we won't worry about that. And there we have our second layer. Again, not perfect, and with washes your guide does turn out to be kind of shiny. A way to get around that is by using matte varnishes. I don't happen to have any on me right now. It's in the works, right? Haven't quite got there yet. Oop, don't want to knock my go over. And now it's kind of a finishing touch. We're going to break out the lead belcher. Get our tiny brush here, one that's still in pretty decent shape compared to the other ones. And actually don't want too much water on there. I will say, if you're not used to thinning paints, the hardest challenge, especially in my book, is thinning metallic paints. If you do it too much, it just kind of slides off the model. But if you don't thin it enough, it really clumps up and it looks really bad. So you want to kind of avoid that as much as possible. And again, it's better to be too thin rather than too thick. So if you're in doubt, add more water, and if you don't like it, go back and do it over again a few times. Too thin layers, right? That's the key thing. And actually, having done the wash under that, it already kind of gives a kind of more metallic look than it just would on its own. So I think we don't even need to do Nuln Oil over that. We will leave it just as it is. So there we are, two grimy looking B1 Battledroids, done very quickly. I might do some more touch-ups on the base afterwards, specifically with, you can kind of see the blue shining through there. But for the most part, those are done. Bob's your uncle. If you guys enjoyed this, thank you very much. Go ahead and leave a like, comment, subscribe if you want. Next time, I have something kind of special in mind. I happen to get the, if I can fit it all on camera here, let me move some things. The Warhammer Plus exclusive miniature came in the mail today, actually, and it is the, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, we'll say just Chaos Sorcerer Lord. There you go. This was, I believe, last year's model technically, but you have to be subscribed for a year to get the free model, so it's not really free when you pay a year's subscription, but it's okay. Don't think about it too much. Either way, there's a little teaser for next time. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, be sure to share it with your friends, or don't. It doesn't matter much to me. If you guys want to see more, check out my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.